Halloween. We'll wake the dead and make the suburbs scream. We can be whoever we want to be. This night can only get better. Let's stay up late watching horror movies. Just remember Freddy's only in dreams. Stay close and we can both avoid the creeps. This night is only getting better.
Can we make this last forever? Pumpkins fly on while we're near together. Just make a promise that you'll never break. If I'm in your Alice, you'll be my good heart.
Candy corn and witchy treats. I'll trade your Kit Kat for receipts. You give me the sugar rush of my dreams. My tooth is only getting sweeter. I've got a Dracula cape for you and me to lay on the roof and watch the moon rising. As the bats screech above us and the wolves howl out, we'll know this night can't get any better. You'll never break. Come and dance with me this Halloween. We'll wake the dead and make the suburbs scream. We can be whoever we want to be. This night can only get better. Let's stay up late watching horror movies. Just remember Freddy's only in dreams. Stay close and we can both avoid the creeps. This night is only getting better.
Can we make this last forever? Pumpkins fly on while we're near together. Just make a promise that you'll never break. If I'm in your Alice, you'll be my good heart.
Candy corn and witchy treats. I'll trade your Kit Kat for receipts. You give me the sugar rush of my dreams. My tooth is only getting sweeter. I've got a Dracula cape for you and me to lay on the roof and watch the moon rising. As the bats screech above us and the wolves howl out, we'll know this night can't get any better. You'll never break. Come and dance with me this Halloween. We'll wake the dead and make the suburbs scream. We can be whoever we want to be. This night can only get better. Let's stay up late watching horror movies. Just remember Freddy's only in dreams. Stay close and we can both avoid the creeps. This night is only getting better.
Can we make this last forever? Pumpkins fly on while we're near together. Just make a promise that you'll never break. If I'm in your Alice, you'll be my good heart.
Candy corn and witchy treats. I'll trade your Kit Kat for receipts. receive. You give me the sugar rush of my dreams. My tooth is only getting sweeter. I've got a Dracula cape for you and me to lay on the roof and watch the moon rising. As the bats screech above us and the wolves howl out, we'll know this night can't get any better. That you'll never break. Come and dance with me this Halloween. We'll wake the dead and make the suburbs scream. We can be whoever we want to be. This night can only get better. Let's stay up late watching horror movies. Just remember Freddy's only in dreams. Stay close and we can both avoid the creeps. This night is only getting better.
Can we make this last forever? Pumpkin smile, blowing in together. Just make a promise that you'll never break. If I be your Alice and be my Mad Hatter.
Candy corn and witchy trees. I'll trade your Kit Kat for receipt. You give me the sugar rush of my dreams. My tooth is only getting sweeter. I've got a Dracula cape for you and me to lay on the roof and watch the moon rising. As the bats screech above us and the wolves howl out, we'll know this night can't get any better. That you'll never break. Come and dance with me this Halloween. We'll wake the dead and make the suburbs scream. We can be whoever we want to be. This night can only get better. Let's stay up late watching horror movies. Just remember Freddy's only in dreams. Stay close and we can both avoid the creeps. This night is only getting better.
Can we make this last forever? Pumpkin smile, blowing in together. Just make a promise that you'll never break. If I be your Alice, you'll be my Mad Hatter.
Candy corn and witchy trees. I'll trade your Kit Kat for receipt. You give me the sugar rush of my dreams. My tooth is only getting sweeter. I've got a Dracula cape for you and me to lay on the roof and watch the moon rising. As the bats screech above us and the wolves howl out, we'll know this night can't get any better. this Halloween. We'll wake the dead and make the suburbs scream. We can be whoever we want to be. This night can only get better. Let's stay up late watching horror movies. Just remember Freddy's only in dreams. Stay close and we can both avoid the creeps. This night is only getting better.
Can we make this last forever? Pumpkin smile, while we're near together. Just make a promise that you'll never break. If I be your Alice, you'll be my Mad Hatter.
Candy corn and witchy treats. I'll trade your Kit Kat for receipt. You give me the sugar rush of my dreams.
And you know what? I realized my microphone was off. Sorry, guys. So what I had said, just to basically repeat myself, especially if you are just now tuning in, tonight we're going to be exploring the eerie yet fascinating world of bog bodies. Not bog butter. I know we've talked about both of them before. But the ancient, perfectly preserved human remains found in the peat bogs of mostly Europe. We're going to be discussing both the historical significance, some of the science behind their preservation, as well as the cultural myths that surround them. So we're going to pop in real quick, see who's here. If you're new, please say hello. We always do love new victims here in the crypt. I am your host, Mother Della Morte. This is my horror gallery, and we cover mostly dark history, folklore, things along those lines. So if that's your jam, this is where you can find it. So let's pop over to the comments real quick, and I'm going to try to fix my camera. Hold on just a second. How to overlay. There we go. Give it a moment to pop up. Boom, there you guys are. So we have Kisa. She says, hello, Odd Mama. All right, let's see if I can pinch that in a little bit. All right, and then let's see. Yes. So Whitechapel says, you're muted. I know. There's so many buttons with this new program, and we are slowly learning them. So, that off there. And then we have Star. Hello, Star. How are you? So glad that you could join us tonight. This is going to be a good one. A lot of you guys may be familiar with bog bodies, but they're pretty cool. They're pretty cool, and the history behind them is fairly terrifying what these ancient ancestors went through as far as just cultural beliefs, things along those lines. I kind of have my own opinion about some of these bog bodies and maybe how they got to be where they were found. So bog people, or what most people refer to as bog bodies, they're, like I said, also known as bog buddies, or basically a naturally mummified, but a little bit different. Like when people think of mummies, they think of like ancient Egypt and just kind of the basically drying out of whatever they're trying to mummify. This is more like pickling. So they're just like human pickles is the best way to explain it. Mother's Nature's pickle vat. So this type of mummification is more like pickling the remains of humans and animals found in the peat bogs. They are geographically and chronologically widespread, with dates ranging from around 8000 BC to even the Second World War, and even after that. Like, don't think that murderers haven't thought about throwing bodies into a peat bog. Probably not the best idea if you don't understand how a peat bog works, because it will preserve the evidence pretty good. Now, the best preserved bodies are found in what are called raised bogs, which are formed in basins with poor drainage. So basically, think of like a divot or a ravine, and it fills up with water, and then you have different mosses and things like that that grow over the water, basically. So they can be really dangerous, and you do have to use special, they almost look like snowshoes if you go out and you're like walking around the bogs, because you definitely don't want to fall in these things, even though they may not be exceptionally deep. Um, it's kind of like ice. They cover over really fast, and you don't really have anything to grab onto to pull yourself out of a bog. So very watery quicksand, I guess, would be a good way to put it too. Now, these bogs, they contain few minerals and very little oxygen, but lots of acidity. So they're very acidic versus alkaline. Now, we're gonna go over like a couple of, because there's hundreds of these bog bodies that they've pulled out of the bogs, but we're gonna go over a few of the better known ones. And I've got some, visuals that we can look at. It's weird what the bogs do to a human body. And I'm gonna kind of go down a rabbit hole really quick for those of you guys that have caught, that you guys have been with us for a long time. It was also a way to preserve food stuff. And bog butter was a really big thing. Butter was almost like cash back a lot, like hundreds of years ago. And so people would preserve it in the bogs, which would give it kind of a cheesy taste, if that makes any sense. So think of like butter and cheese mixed together. I would be willing to try it. It actually looks pretty good. But the bad thing about bog butter and sheep, which doesn't make a lot of sense if you think about how it preserves a human body, but sheep, for whatever reason, I guess because they're covered in wool, can turn into something that looks very similar to bog butter. So you have to be super careful. You don't want to just pull something out of the bog and start eating on it thinking that it's bog butter, because it may just be like a extremely old pickled sheep, and that would be disgusting. So just a little offshoot there, but we're going to talk about some of the better known ones. And some of the better known ones would be bog bodies such as the Tolan Man. And I'm going to do my best to say some of these. The Harlskeiger Woman, the Gobble Man, the Winby Girl, the Lindau Man, the Connie Clavin Man, the Old Krogan Man, and the Yid Girl. And so we're not going to touch on all of them. They all have their own independent stories that are really interesting. But I wanted to get some of the ones that have kind of a macabre feel to them. And we'll talk about the history and what may have happened to them and how they met their demise. So, but before we do that, let's kind of talk about the bogs themselves, so that for those of you that don't really know about bog bodies, kind of how that process works. So the unique chemical composition of bogs, which includes cold temperatures, acidic water, which we talked about just a moment, the lack of oxygen. What this does is it prevents the usual decomposition of a body after death. As a result, the soft tissue of the body can be preserved for thousands of years. Now, these bog bodies are often found in raised bogs, which I explained just a moment ago what the raised bogs are, which they kind of carry sort of a dome shape to them. It looks kind of like lumpy fields, when actually, in actuality, it's a bog. Now, these dome-shaped formations that develop in the cool temperature regions are these ideal conditions. The conditions in the bog can preserve the skin, the hair, and the clothing to a remarkable degree. Now, the preservation of bog bodies in peat bogs is a natural phenomenon, and not the result of, like I mentioned a little earlier, the basic human mummification process that we normally think of when we think of mummies. It's a pickled person, is what it is. It is caused by the unique physical and biochemical compositions of the bogs themselves. Now, there are different types of bogs, and different types of bogs can affect mummification processes differently. Now, raised bogs, which is what we're mostly going to talk about tonight, they preserve the corpse, whereas fens and transitional bogs tend to preserve the harder tissues, such as the skeleton, rather than the soft tissue. Now, a limited number of bogs have the correct conditions for preservation of mammalian tissue, so people, animals. Most of these are located, like I said, in colder climates near bodies of salt water. So I wonder if it's almost like at one point it was brackish water or something along those lines. Now, the weird thing about the bog bodies, and you're going to see when you talk about meat sack, that's exactly what we're talking about. Because when the moss on these domed bogs begin to die, they produce sorghum, okay? And I know that you guys are probably, if anybody gardens, or sphagnum, I'm sorry, sphagnum moss. The sphagnum moss is what is created when these mosses start to deteriorate and die. And that's actually what kind of sends out some of these chemicals to help preserve these bodies. It will turn the water, it will basically demineralize the water with this acidic type chemical, making basically the bodies are more fragile because the bones actually dissolve over time. It's basically, you're going to see more of the preservation of the skin. It will normally take on a dark or tanned appearance due to the tannins that are in the bog water. So think of tea. Now, most of the bog bodies that you see will have or tend to have a reddish hue, if not a bright red hue, to their hair, whether it's the beard hair or, you know, the head hair. That does not mean that they were just throwing gingers into these bogs left and right. Basically, this sphagnum moss, what it does is, because of these tannins, if a body or some sort of mammal is in the bogs for a long period of time, it's going to dye the hair and the skin and things like that. So a lot of these, if not most of these bog bodies, will come out with red hair, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they had red hair. Most often, if it's bright red, they probably had a light, they were more tow-headed or blonde or something along those lines. A deeper, darker red would probably indicate that they were brunette. So that's why you see a lot of these bog bodies with red hair. Now, bog bodies have been variously found with all different types of things that led to their demise, whether it's cut throats, severed limbs, broken bones, ropes around their neck, entrails pulled through the skin, and other marks that suggest the possibility that they were ritually killed or murdered. Now, usually the corpses were found naked, sometimes with some items of clothing with them, particularly the headgear. Like, I don't know what it was about, like, the ancestors in that area, that for whatever reason they like to throw people into bogs with no clothing, but they wanted to make sure they had some jazzy headgear. So everybody seems to have a lot of like little hats and different things along those lines. Now, the clothing is believed to have decomposed while in the bog, and that could be true if it's basically what I've been reading, maybe if it's more of a cotton nature, but if it's something like wool or leather or something along those lines that comes from a mammal, it tends to preserve just as well. It's the things that may be more like textile that are made out of plant material that may wind up dissolving at some period over time. Now, in a number of cases, twigs, sticks, or stones are placed on top of the body, sometimes in a cross formation, and at other times, forked sticks had been driven into the peat to hold down the corpse. According to archaeologist V.P. Glob, yes, Glob, G-L-O-B, this probably indicates the wish to pin the dead firmly into the bog. Now, that could just mean they don't want it floating, or that could be something like a punishment, and they want this person's spirit to be in limbo and constantly tied to a place that's considered either off limits or in some cases maybe thought of as like the in-between spaces, because bogs are really kind of a liminal space. There's a lot going on there, but at the same time there's not. So now the overwhelming majority of bog bodies, like I said, includes such as the Tolan man, the Grobbly man, and the Lindau man, date to the Iron Age and have been found in Northwest Europe, particularly Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Poland, and Ireland. That's where you're going to find the majority. Now, before we actually start getting into these specific bog bodies, let's go ahead and take a look at the comments real quick, because I do see a lot in the little comment section there. Oh no, let's hope it's not cursed. I think it's just operator error. I'm still learning a lot of these buttons. And then Kisa says there's millions of bacteria in bogs. They can be, but at the same time, they're very, what is it called? Anaerobic, because there's a lack of oxygen. The body doesn't break down like you would normally think, but there is a lot of chemical reaction that goes on in bogs. Kisa says, bleh, I'll pass on the pickled sheep. Well, if you remember, because I do believe you were in that feed. I'm sitting here thinking about bog butter. And we were looking at those pictures of bog butter. Like the one that normally they would wrap like, think about if you took like the bark off a tree, like if you were debarking a tree, and they would use that as like a cask to hold the butter, like make a container out of it. And that's kind of usually how you would know, hopefully, that it's not a blob of sheep versus bog butter. And you can order it. There's actually companies that specialize in it. Of course, it's not aged for thousands of years or hundreds of years, but it is aged for a period of time, which will give it some of that flavor. I've thought about ordering some, you know. I thought about just to try it. And so Whitechapel says more or less a preserved raisin. In a way, yes, in a way. They look kind of like jerky, like human jerky. And like I said, like the organs and stuff normally, if they haven't been removed for whatever reason, like disemboweled or whatever, they're usually pretty preserved, but all the skeletal structure is gone. So yeah, in a way, they kind of look like a mix between a raisin and beef jerky. Yeah, a doctor named Glob. And then Whitechapel says a bog crucifixion. We're going to kind of get into some of that because they do think that maybe a large percentage of this, these bodies, could be for ritualistic reasons. So Kisa says, yeah, I kind of remember the bog butter. And Nadine, hello Nadine, how are you? So glad you're here to join us. All right. Okay, I think we've got to everybody. All right, so let's talk about the first person. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a picture, and thankfully this program will let me talk with a picture up. It won't mute my mic automatically. So we're going to talk about the Toland, or the Toland man, and I'm going to pull up a picture of him real quick. And he's probably like one of the best preserved and one of the only ones that doesn't seem to have like this horrific look of pain and terror on his face. So let's see if it'll let me add it. Hold on just a second. It is taking a minute. All right, let's try it one more time and see what happens. Let's see. There we go. There we go. So he actually looks very like serene. He doesn't have these horrific like screams of anguish or anything like that on his face. And he is very dark and tanned looking. He even has preserved like chin hair and stuff. Now, the Tola man is naturally mummified, a naturally mummified corpse of a man who lived during the 5th century BCE, during the period characterized in Scandinavia as pre-Roman Iron Age. He was found in 1950, preserved as a bog body near Silkeborg, in the Jutland Peninsula in Denmark. The man's physical features were so well preserved that he was mistaken for a recent murder victim. Now, noteworthy, he has the most well-preserved body of all bog bodies to date. Only his arms and hands are like those of a skeleton. So, for whatever reason, it didn't completely dissolve his bones. I don't know why. It could have been the particular bog that he was in. Just for whatever reason, didn't decalcify his body as fast as maybe some others do. Now, either his clothing disintegrated or he was buried wearing only a pointed cap made of sheepskin and an ox hide belt. So we really don't know if he was put in the bog naked or not. Like I said, his arms and hands were almost skeletonized and partly ruined due to the peat diggers digging in the bog. So that could have been why they looked more skeletal, because you'll see some bog bodies that look very clean cut, so to speak. So old, Tom, who is the bog body, could very well be in someone's garden somewhere, and they just had no idea because for whatever reason they didn't realize that his bottom half was in the square of peat that they dug up and ground up to send off to the gardening center. So that is that is very possible. Now, only the feet and one finger were completely intact. The head was almost shockingly well preserved. The eyes were closed, and so was the mouth. The look on his face was peaceful and solemn, as if he were simply sleeping. Now, additionally, a noose made of plaited animal hide was drawn tightly around his neck and trailed down his back. And you can kind of see that if you look at his neck a little bit. It's like a braided piece of something. That's actually a braided rope that was made out of animal hide. So because it's, mammal, organic mammal material, it pickled right along with the rest of him. Now, the cause of death has been determined to be hanging. There is insufficient evidence to determine if the reason for his hanging was a ritual sacrifice or some sort of punitive execution for something he may have done. His hair was cropped so short as to be almost entirely hidden by the cap. You can still see a little of it in there. There's short stubble on his chin and upper lip, suggesting that he was usually clean shaven, but had not shaved on the day of his death. The Tolan man was approximately around 40 years old when he died, and the Tolan man's last meal consisted of a porridge with barley, flax, wild weed seeds, and a little bit of fish. So they were even able to look at his stomach contents after all of this time, which is absolutely amazing. So let's get him off of here, and we're going to do one more, and then I'll get to the comments. So we're going to talk about the Yid girl. Now, guys, this is a reconstruction of what she may have looked like. So I can't say to the issue with the forehead. It could have been that the weight of the bog made it very hard to reconstruct because it will kind of flatten people out. But this is the Yid girl. See if it'll come up. There we go. All right. So the Yid girl is the most famous bog body in the Netherlands. She was discovered in the peat in May of 1897 by two turf cutters, basically peat diggers, from Drineth. It's very hard for me to pronounce these Norwegian and Scandinavian names. So anyway, they were so startled by what they had found that they immediately fled because her hair was so red, they thought she was the devil. The news spread rapidly. The mayor of Bodìes decided to inform the provincial museum in Ossen. They soon determined that it was a unique find. Further investigation showed that the body was largely intact. Now, C14 dating, or what we know as carbon dating, showed that the girl must have lived between 54 BCE and 128 CE, which would have been during the Iron Age. When she died, she was around 16 years old. She had on a woolen band with a slip knot around her neck, which shows that she was probably strangled. It is also very probable that she was stabbed in the neck with a knife because there was a wound that they were able to see as well. It appears that shortly before her death, one side of her head was shaved. Now, they did later come back and say that that probably was not the case. It could have been for whatever reason. Her body did float for a short period of time on that side, and so therefore that area of the body did start to decompose a little bit, which made it look like one side of her head had been shaved. Now, why the Yid girl was killed still remains a mystery. Because she was found next to a small mirror, and I'm not really sure what a mirror is, I'll have to look that up. Archaeologists suspect that she was killed deliberately and then ritually sacrificed. Mirrors and inaccessible bogs were considered places for ritual sacrifice or to access higher powers. Now, another possibility is that the girl was shunned by her community because she did seem to have some skeletal issues. I do believe that she suffered from like a kind of severe form of scoliosis, which did cause her to walk with a limp. There may have been something going on with the large cranial space. I don't know. But she did seem to have some physical issues going on. Now, like I said, the examination has shown that she did have defects to the spine. And physical defects have also been found in other bog bodies. Now, there also seems to be a little bit of an argument there, whereas some people think that they were shunned and thought to maybe possess some sort of evil spirit or something along those lines, and then that's why they were chosen for some sort of ritual sacrifice. They could have been blamed for a bad harvest or, something along those lines. Now, if you also look, in a lot of cases, if you were born with some sort of unusual abnormality, you might actually be seen as touched by whatever god that particular community worshipped. So it might be the total other end of the spectrum, and she was revered, therefore she was considered a very, very good sacrifice to the gods for, it could be, like I said, anything from a good harvest to maybe something they do on a solstice. I don't know, but there does seem to be some disagreement as to if there was some sort of ritual sacrifice, the reasonings for that, if there was some sort of abnormality found with the bog body. Now, based on the results, the University of Manchester created a facial reconstruction. This reconstruction of a girl with blonde hair, blue eyes, and slightly brown skin received global attention. So she has been, I do believe, she was the first to ever be um, like reconstructed, like they did here in this picture. So that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. So let's take this down real quick, and then I'm going to get to the comments real quick. All right, so let's see what we've got going on here. And then Nadine says, hi, guys. And then Kisa says, I'm looking at some on Big. They do remind me of jerky or a Tootsie Roll color. They absolutely do, don't they? They absolutely do. It's kind of odd. All right, let's see. Oh, Bing. She was looking at it on Bing. And then she says that he looks very peaceful. He does, and he's about the only one that I'm going to be showing tonight, other than that reconstruction, that actually has a look of peace on his face. If he has a face. So, and Kisa also says this piece, it's amazing and interesting. It is. It absolutely is. And then Whitechapel says he could have been a person of status. He very well could have been. Again, I don't know the cultural ins and outs of the Iron Age as to how they may have interacted with each other, but it's very possible. I know in some of them, they can sometimes tell if the person had a regular diet of food or if there were like periods between where there was, severe malnutrition or something along those lines. That a lot of times will kind of help them figure that out too. Were they a person of status, or were they maybe a criminal, or had done something to upset the community for whatever reason? Let's see. Yes, there are some poems about a couple of them. You're absolutely right. That's what Kisa says. Let's see. And Whitechapel says, poor girl. Yeah, yeah, it's sad. It's really sad. Um, but things were so different back then. People married at an earlier age and had children at an earlier age and died at an earlier age. So, You know, we think 16, we're thinking, God, that's just a baby. But that could have very well equaled out to being 30 years old back then. You know, we just really don't know. All right, so let's see. And Akisa says they could have thought she was cursed. That's very possible. That's absolutely possible. And Whitechapel says like a scapegoat. Yeah. So, oh, there's Frank. Hey, Fwin. I thought y'all are off watching the wrestling thing. So Frank says hello. Let's see. Yes, bog butter. Well, we're talking about bog bodies tonight. But of course, if we talk about bog bodies, we of course have to bring up bog butter that I really do want to try. Let's see. And Roots Bleed Red is here. They say, hello, hi. Well, so glad you are here. And Akia, hey. She says, hello. I'm so glad you guys were able to make it. I figured y'all were off watching that show you're looking forward to. So, no worries. I'm just glad you guys were able to make it. So, we've only covered 2 bog bodies so far. So, and we're going to get into some kind of cool stuff that you may not know about here in a moment. Let's see. All right, I think I've got everybody covered. So let's go ahead and get back to this real quick. All right, so who are we on now? We're on the Grobelli man. So let me go ahead and pull up a picture of him. All right, now the Grobelli man, I'm going to call him the king of the Twister. He was the winner of the Twister game. All right, so he's in a very unusual position, and you've noticed he's started to flatten out. Now, the Grobelli man was discovered in April 26th of 1952 by a team of Danish, of course, peat cutters in the bog of Nelbengard Fen near the village of Gerbali. Initially, townsfolk believed that the bog body belonged to a man that they had known by the name of Red Christian. He was another local peat cutter, but he was also known for being, he really liked to drink. So he was pretty much the town drunk. Now, Red went missing around 1887, and it is believed to have, that they believe they had stumbled on him because he basically had stumbled out into a bog while he was drunk and drowned, which unfortunately is not uncommon, not an uncommon fate. But the story was behind the 2 bodies pulled out of an English bog in Cheshire. So it's not unusual. That's the reason I said you have to wear special types of shoes to walk on bogs. And then sometimes you may not even know that it is a bog because it can grow completely over with that shrubby like moss. And it might look like a brushy field or something. So unfortunately, it's not that unusual for people to fall into bogs and drown, much like quicksand, you know, because you don't have anything to grab onto to pull yourself out. But still, the townspeople figured they ought to be sure, so they called in a local amateur archaeologist. His name was Yurik Balsev, as well as the village doctor. Now, a cursory examination of the man revealed that he was naked and had a terrible grimace on his face. So if you see other pictures of this particular bog body, like, it must have been horrifying because when they were cutting peat, basically it was just his head poking out of the mud. And he had this horrible looking scream on his face. So it would probably have been absolutely terrifying if you had been a peat cutter out there and had stumbled upon this. Now, unable to determine the identity of the man or the cause of death, the locals, like I said, had also contacted a scientist at the Aarhus Museum of Prehistory. Again, Professor Peter Glob, came by the next morning and oversaw a team of peat cutters as they removed a large block of peat containing the body. Once at the museum, Glob's team performed a complete examination of the man. He was believed to have been around 30 years old at the time of his death. He would have stood at around 5 foot 7 inches tall, and they do tend to shrink when they become basically human pickles, but that's what they kind of guess. Now, the hair still clinging to his head was around 2 inches long. The man had stubble on his chin, and his hands and fingers showed no sign of manual labor. To everyone's surprise, further scientific examinations, such as radiocarbon dating, revealed that the Garbelli man had lived in the late Iron Age, probably around 310 BC to 55 BC. Scanning the body with an electron microscope confirmed the visual suggestion that the man's hands were unaccustomed to manual labor, as his fingerprints were relatively smooth. Analysis of the contents of his stomach showed that his last meal was corn porridge. There were also seeds from over 60 different herbs and grasses. The researchers were also able to determine that the herbs and the berries in his stomach were not fresh, so I guess they had been dried, suggesting that the man had probably died sometime around during the winter or maybe even early spring, when the village or the people of that time were still consuming preserved foodstuffs. Now, they also found in his stomach that it showed traces of a poisonous fungi called ergot. And we know what ergot can do. Too much of it, of course, can kill you. Not, just a little bit can cause you to lose your freaking mind and hallucinate. The same thing they think may have happened in Salem as far as the witch panic before the Salem witch trials. Now, most striking of all was the forensic analysis that revealed the injuries to the body, notably to the throat, being cut from ear to ear. And from what I understand, it was cut so deeply it almost decapitated him, probably explaining why his head is at that weird angle, that there just wasn't a whole lot holding it together and keeping it in place. So it just kind of, I guess when he was at the bottom of the bog or the peat, the weight of the peat just basically turned his head like that. Still looks like the winner of a Twister game, but that's probably what happened. Now, they also found that his skull was fractured and right tibia broken. However, they do think that these particular injuries probably happened after death, and possibly from the pressure of the bog, or, maybe even somebody like, I don't know, like damaging him somehow unknowingly, because this is an area where they do go and cut peat. So, and peat is used for several different things. Like I said, it's used for gardening. It's also dried out and used for fuel, much like coal. It's how people heated their homes way, way back in the day. So, that's another reason why peat is so popular, or so necessary, so important. Now, the theories abound as to what caused this man's death. No items were found, nor any articles of clothing, though it is entirely possible that the man was wearing clothes at the time of his death, but that they dissolved in the watery bog over time. Two prominent theories have emerged, both which rely on present knowledge of life in Northern Europe in the 3rd century BC. The first theory argues that the man was a criminal who paid for his crimes with his life. And if his hands look like they haven't seen any manual labor, when we think of crimes, we think of like crimes. But you got to understand, in these times, it took a whole village to survive a winter. So therefore, if you had someone that was not willing to contribute, they were actually seen as kind of a threat to the community. So that very well could have been his crime. We just really don't know. Now, the other prominent theory may have been that, he was killed for sacrificial purposes, so he probably was of higher status. He could have been some sort of like religious status, maybe some sort of priest or something, medicine man, anything along those lines that would probably keep you out of what you think of as manual labor. So that is him. And then we're going to go to one more, and then we'll get back to the comments. All right. This is the Harald Scheiser woman. Now, the Harald Scheiser woman is the name given to a bog body of a woman preserved in a bog in Jutland, Denmark. So a lot of these have been found in Denmark. And dating from around 490 BC, pre-Roman Iron Age. Workers found the body in 1835, while, of course, excavating peat. And you can see her bones have pretty much completely deteriorated. So she is basically, she's a meat sack. She's a pickled meat sack. Now, excavators found the body of the Holger woman. I'm sorry, it is like a Scandinavian name, and it's not easy to pronounce. They found her in a supine position in an excellent state of preservation. She was naked, and her clothes, consisting of a leather cape and 3 woolen garments, have been placed on top of her. So basically, I don't know if they were graven goods or what, but for whatever reason, they were on top of her. Now, hurdles of branches and wooden poles pin down the body. The complete skin enveloped, and the complete skin envelope. So they're calling her basically an envelope, because it's just the skin pretty much. And the internal organs are intact. The body had a lancing wound, however, to the knee joint area, where some object, possibly one of the sharp poles, penetrated to some depth. And they really honestly don't know if she was pinned down pre-death or post-death. Because basically they just don't know. They don't know if maybe the area around that area where they see that puncture mark swole a little bit before she completely died, kind of like the body's reaction, or if maybe for whatever reason the peat, the bog itself caused some sort of swelling. I don't know. So they're not really clear on whether she was pinned down prior to death or after death. Doctors have determined that she had been around 50 years of age when she died, and in good health without signs of degenerative diseases such as arthritis, which are really typically found in human remains of that age. So people, they worked so hard. It was very hard on their bodies. Forensic analysis reveals the stomach contents contained unhusked millet and blackberries. Her neck had a faint groove, as if someone had applied a rope for either torture or strangulation. Now, since cremation was the prevailing mode of internment during this particular period of time in Jutland, the examiners guess that this particular body was the victim of some sort of ritual sacrifice. Again, with the rope, I don't know. I mean, to me, it could be 50-50. She could have, been done for some, killed for some ritual reason, or she could have committed some sort of egregious action against the community, and maybe the family, put those graven goods with her after the fact. There's really no way of knowing. It's really, at this point, like with her body, I wouldn't necessarily run right out and say, oh, it's a ritual sacrifice, just because she has those rope impressions around her neck. I would almost say it's more like she was murdered, or she was punished for something. But then again, I'm not an archaeologist, and what do I know? So let's get to the comments real quick, and then we'll get on to the next one, which is really, really interesting. Let me get this off here real quick. Okay, so let's see what we've got going on. Oh, Lawnmower Man. Hi, Calvin. He says that his internet kept crashing, but he thinks he's got it fixed. And he's saying hello, hello, hello. So glad you can join us. Let me get that off there real quick. Yes. So Kisa agrees. He was the winner of the Twister competition. In the game of You Are Really Fucking Dead. Yes, it does. Most of them are going to look that way. It looks like they died in some sort of agony. They weren't. I don't think that they were real peaceful like the Toljan man when they died. It was probably pretty violent. And the Kisa says that it looks almost like the Garibaldi man, that his neck was broken. It does, and it very well could be just the pressure of the bog pushing down. Could twist a neck like that. Could be that his throat was sliced almost all the way through. So his body's kind of terrifying if you look at some of the pictures. Like he does not look like he died well. And then Whitechapel says possibly another sacrifice. That's absolutely possible. And then Whitechapel says that all these deaths sound like witch trials. You know, again, I don't know. I really don't. I honestly think that this is just my personal opinion, of course. I think that at least the Salem witch trials were probably done for power and to obtain property, because the law was that if you accuse someone of witchcraft and they were found guilty, you got their land. So I think that there were alternative motives behind a lot of that when it came to the Salem witch trials. But that's not to say that they didn't sacrifice people way, way back in, like, Iron Age and pre-Roman age for other reasons. It could be that the corn got a blight. And so therefore, that person that nobody likes in the village must have caused it. And so they would, sacrifice that person to, whatever god oversaw corn. I mean, it could be that simple. So we really, really don't know. So let's go ahead and get to the next body. And this is an interesting one. There's not a whole lot left of him, guys. I will tell you that. But he's got an interesting story. Okay. I also find it really interesting that one of his arms looks a lot bigger than the other one. Like, I wonder if it was a deformity. I don't know. And you can also see where he is pretty much cleaved in half very well, as far as where the head is or would have been, as well as the lower half of the body. That could have been done to him after death. That could have been done to him by accident, by people that were cutting peat. So again, he could be in somebody's garden or peat stack to be burned, to keep people warm. I don't know. And they don't even know he's in there. So that could be why he is in the condition that he's in. Now, the one that we're looking at now is the old Krogan man. The old Krogan man, now, he was not found in Denmark. He was actually found in Ireland. He is a well-preserved Irish Iron Age bog body found in June of 2003. The man is calculated based on his arm span and he was huge, to have stood approximately 6 feet 6 inches tall, which is considerably tall, exceptionally tall for that period of time when he lived. So he was a giant. The man's apparently manicured nails leads to the speculation that he was not someone who engaged in manual labor and possibly therefore of high status. His last meal, analyzed from the contents of his stomach, was believed to have been wheat and buttermilk. However, he was shown to have a meat-rich diet for at least 4 months prior to his death. Scars on his lungs did suggest that at some point he had suffered from pleurisy, which is almost like really bad pneumonia. Now, the man was buried at a bog, likely once it had actually been a lake, at the foot of an ancient hill that is used for kingship ceremonies, suggesting that he was a king or even a prince who was sacrificed by druids due to poor weather or harvest. These ancient tribes may have believed that this was caused by the failure of the king, and he was personally responsible. Now, the old Krogan man is believed to have died between 362 BC and 175 BC, making the body over 2,000 years old. Evidence indicates that the man was in his early 20s when he was killed. He was naked except for the plaited leather band around his left arm. This likely indicates that he was of high status. The man is believed to have died from a stab wound to the chest. He was also decapitated, so his head was done, I guess, removed prior to being thrown in the bog, and that his body had been cut in half. He also had an injury to one arm, possibly evidence that he had tried to defend himself. So all these are actually probably pre-bog. That's interesting. That poor man went through some shit. Now, the body was found to have deep cuts under each nipple. Now, I've got to tell you, this is probably going to freak some people out because it kind of grossed me out a little bit too. But in these times, if a king was dethroned, a lot of times they would either cut off the nipples or they would mutilate them in some way, because the way to show subservience to a king was to suckle at his nipple. Yes, that really happened. So this gave these archaeologists enough indication that not only was he tortured while he was alive, but that his nipples were deliberately mutilated either before or after death for symbolic purposes, suggesting that the mutilation was a symbolic gesture to mark the man as a rejected ruler for whatever reason. Now, other theories suggest that the old Krogan man and other bog bodies were sacrificed to gods for fertility or harvest and killed and buried. The reason they think this is because of the contents of their stomachs. Apparently, they found quite a few that had cereals and buttermilk. So therefore, they kind of postulate that they could have been sacrificed to gods that kind of handle fertility and harvest and things along those lines to ensure good yields of cereals and buttermilk. So now we're going to get into something that you may not be aware of. I learned this while I was doing this research, and this is really interesting. So we've talked about bog bodies, and we have, confirmed that it is a form of mummification. Again, a little bit different. It's more like a pickle rather than drying something out. So there are also things called bog mummies. Now, instances of deliberate mummification in Europe are rare. But while performing excavation in 2001 in Clodagh, this is in Scotland, a Bronze Age settlement on the island of South Uist in Scotland's Outer Hebrides, archaeologists found a pair of 3,000-year-old skeletons that did fit this criteria for bog mummies. Now, this is weird. They're also referred to as the Franken mummies. Now, DNA and isotopic dating reveals that the mummies were made up of body parts from at least 6 different people. The female mummy was made up of a male skull, a female torso, and an arm from a third person. The male mummy was made up of body parts from people who had died over a few hundred years, not only apart, but prior. So these body parts were of all different ages, basically, like as far as how long they had been around. Some body parts were older than others. And I do actually have a picture of this, so let me pull that up real quick. It's just one of them. But it really perplexed the archaeologists at first, because they were like, how the hell did they build this mummy and it's in a fetal position? And hold on, it looks like I'm going to have to redo it again. Let me remove it. Okay. And let's try it one more time. Let's see if it works this time. There we go. So, these archaeologists were looking at this and they were like, okay, something doesn't fit here. It may have a pelvis of a female, but the skull shape of a male, yet it's in this fetal position, and it looks like it's been completely like this was a real thing before it died. But so that got them to asking questions, and that's when they were able to figure out that these mummies were actually made up of different people. And they do believe that these different body parts had been kept with families for even up to hundreds of years prior to putting them together like this. So it's almost like, I would consider it a form of ancestral worship. But anyway, let's get back to it. So the archaeologists speculate that the mummies were created to actually combine different ancestries into a single lineage. The mixing of the remains could have been a way to create a legal document that gave descendants access to certain lands or resources. Now, chemical evidence suggests that these mummies were actually preserved in bogs for at least a year prior to them being assembled. The bog only ate away at the outer 2 millimeters of the bones. So they know that, these body parts were actually somewhat pickled prior to them being dried out in like a more dry atmosphere, so that they basically could be kept with families to use as, like they said, some sort of like mixing of ancestral, remains. It could be a marriage, it could be some sort of legal agreement, who knows. Now, like the bones were only eaten 2 millimeters. Now, after the analysis, the mummies were rebuilt or reburied. I'm sorry, back where they had been found. So they put them, they reinterned them and left them alone. So yeah, I thought that was kind of cool. Something I did not know. Definitely a way to sign a contract with your next door neighbor, I guess. Not really sure, but let's get to the comments, and then we're going to kind of finish this up. I've ran over just a little bit tonight. So let's see. Let me take that down. Move. And then we'll get to the comments real quick. Come on. There we go. Oh my goodness. Whitechapel said, "Get Vice in here. She might start talking about William Wallace. She might." And then Kisa says, "Very interesting." Yeah, it is. It's pretty interesting. All right, let me see if let's see. Let me go back up here real quick. And Hall just says, "Yummy." All these pickled people jerky. And then Whitechapel says easiest target. Yeah, sometimes it could be the easiest target. You're absolutely correct. Like some of these people they chose if it was for some sort of sacrifice or blame, you know, something along those lines. So Kisa says apparently bog snorkeling is a thing. Oh my goodness. That's kind of scary, isn't it? It's kind of scary. And I'm assuming you're talking about the old Krogan man, that he had healthy nail beds. Yeah, some of these, I believe it was the Tolan man. He was actually fingerprinted. So he is like known as having the oldest fingerprints in the database. You know, just in case they run up on those archaeological murders, they'll have his fingerprints. So let's get back to this and kind of bring all this to a close. Now, when most of us think of bog bodies, we think, of course, of the areas that we've been talking about, northwestern Europe, Ireland, or Denmark. However, North America has its peat bogs too, and some of them contain remarkably well-preserved remains of ancient people. One site in particular stands out as America's premier bog body site. That would be Wendover, Florida. Now, I'm going to tell you the story of how this particular group of bog bodies were found, and it's kind of funny in a way, how it kind of all starts out. So basically, it was a warm spring day in 1982 when a backhoe operator by the name of Steve Valdenjaget paused to examine a pale rock he had uncovered while working construction near the edge of a pond at Wendover Farms in Brevard County in Florida. Turning the object over in his hands, I'm just going to call him Steve. Steve saw two eye sockets and realized he was holding a human skull. And his first thought was, oh shit. What Steve did not know at the time was that he had stumbled across a prehistoric cemetery that would prove to be one of the most amazing archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Developers Jack Eckerd, son of the famous drugstore founder, Eckerd Drugs, and his stepson, Jim Swan, had planned for Wendover Farms to become a housing development serving the growing community of Titusville. To help draw people to the area, Swan built a restaurant called The Roost, with a small lunch counter and offices on the second floor. Swan was working at The Roost when Steve walked in carrying a bucket of bones. Not knowing whom to contact, Swan walked the remains over to a nearby Florida Highway Patrol station, so the State Patrol, and according to Swan, they were met with a chilling reception. The troopers took one look at the bucket of skeletons and said, "We only do car wrecks." After an examination by the county coroner showed the bones were not the remains of modern humans and thus of little value to law enforcement, Swan actually had to fight to get these remains back and have them returned to him. Now, when he did get them back, the remains resided in Swan's garage and then in the tiny trailer on the Wendover Farms construction site, where workers repeatedly stubbed their toes on the large containers. But Swan was intrigued by what else might be hidden beneath the layers of the pond muck, and that would have remained a mystery if not for Swan's next decision. He called an archaeologist by the name of Glenn Doran. Doran was a young, up-and-coming professor at Florida State University in Tallahassee. And although he was not the first archaeologist to visit Wendover, he was the first to recognize the site's potential and not be daunted by the challenges it presented. He was immediately fascinated by the age of the remains. Heavy wear on the teeth provided evidence of prehistoric diet, but he didn't have the funds to have them radiocarbon dated. Swan volunteered the money, and when the results of the testing came back, Both men were astounded. The bones were over 7,000 years old, more than 2,000 years older than the Egyptian pyramids. The story these bodies tell begins 9,000 years ago when ancient humans began using Wendover as a cemetery. As the indigenous people moved through the area seasonally, they would bury their dead in the pond during the late summer and early fall. We do not know where they lived during the rest of the year, but we can tell from the level of decomposition that the bodies were interred within about 48 hours after each death. So they were probably living somewhere nearby during the autumn months. The bodies were tucked into a flexed position, and I'm going to show you a picture. It's kind of the same concept as some of these other people, but I think it's for a different purpose. I think it's just the way they buried their dead. All right, so they were buried in a flex position, bundled in fabric along with a variety of graven goods, and submerged beneath the water, typically on their left side facing west. Wooden stakes driven through the clothing and the cloth kept them anchored to the bottom of the pond. Generation after generation returned to the pond to bury their dead in this manner for the next 1,000 years. Now, this particular type of bog, remember when we were talking about the different kinds of bogs, the dome bogs, in comparison to like transitional bogs? The dome bogs will eat the bones and leave the skin. Transitional bones will pretty much let the skin and soft materials slough away, but will preserve the bones really, really well. So the bones at Wendover show signs of numerous ailments, including disease, broken bones, and malnutrition. About half of the individuals died before the age of 18, and many more did not live past their late 40s. By that time, the high level of grit in their diet, caused by using stone tools and surfaces to prepare food, combined with the use of their teeth as a tool, had worn their teeth down to nubs. Arthritis and abscesses were common. By the end of the third field season, however, of the archaeological dig, so to speak, a minimum of 168 skeletons, including 91 with preserved brain tissue, have been discovered. And now there is a funny story that goes along with this. When they found the first skeleton that had brain tissue, it was just a little bit. But nowadays, with a lot of the DNA testing we can do, we don't have to have a lot. But it was so minute that literally the scientists thought it was snail poop. And it was not snail poop, it was brain matter. So 91 of these skeletons that are that old were found with some sort of preserved brain tissue within their skull. It is the largest, most demographically diverse skeleton discovery from this time period in the New World, with ages of the people that are interned here from newborn to over 65 years old, and both sexes are equally presented. So everybody used the cemetery. The state of the preservation of the brain tissue allowed a determination, and this is interesting, that the bodies were buried in the peat within 24 to 48 hours, like we said. The preservation also allowed researchers to sequence the DNA from the brains. The DNA indicated the Wendover people carried genetic markers that link them to ancient populations from Asia, and that they do not match any native populations alive in North America today. Gut contents were found with many of the burials. These included seeds of wild grapes, elderberries, and prickly pear fruit, often in large quantities. So yeah, that is the bog bodies, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. Let me take this picture down. I think we all learned a little bit on this one. I know I did. And let's get to the comments real quick. And then I'm going to bid you guys pleasant nightmares, because I have ran over today. Or tonight. And Kisa says, very interesting. I think so. I think so. This kind of stuff is very interesting to me. Let's see. So Whitechapel, he says that talking about all these bog bodies reminds me of the burial. It says the burial rites. Okay, in New Orleans. Yeah, theirs are a little different too. Theirs are a little different too, with the year and a day, and then they push Grandma back and put Grandpa in his place if whoever the next person was to pass on. So yeah, a lot of those are very different. Very, very different. One family will own one crypt drawer in a lot of cases. So yeah, it's I had a special experience in New Orleans concerning something like that. And then Kisa says, that's fascinating. I thought it was really interesting. I knew nothing about the Franken mummies. And actually, the whole thing that got me to thinking about doing these bog bodies was this particular article here that talked about the North American bog bodies. I did not know that we had bog bodies over here in North America, and that there was a difference in the types of bogs and how they preserved human remains. So, yeah, I thought that was interesting as well. And I really appreciate you guys for showing up and hanging out with me tonight. And then Kisa says, almost like Native American. Yeah, they were in a lot of ways. And a lot of them were buried with like necklaces and charms and different things like that, So, but they must have understood that this particular area preserved the bones of their ancestors very well. I'm not sure how they did, but a lot of things the ancient people did made sense. They may not have understood why it worked, but they knew it worked. So, so yeah, it is very similar. I found it kind of odd that the DNA matches more with ancient Asians than what you would think of as like, our indigenous people here. So that was surprising to me. And then Kisa says she loves to learn about things. I do too. I do too. All right, let's see. Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's it. All right, guys. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I am going to bid you, let me get to where I need to be. Hang on just a second. I'm going to bid you pleasant nightmares, guys. Bye.
I know the world